When an avoidant disrespects you, they're not making a conscious decision to be cruel. They're engaging in an unconscious psychological process called devaluation that helps them manage the overwhelming anxiety that comes with caring deeply about someone. Their disrespectful behavior serves as emotional armor that protects them from the vulnerability they fear will destroy them if they acknowledge how much you actually mean to them. The avoidance nervous system has learned that emotional attachment equals danger. When you become important to them, their brain interprets this significance as a threat to their autonomy and safety. Disrespect becomes their way of convincing themselves that you don't matter as much as their feelings suggest, that they could easily walk away, that their attachment to you isn't as deep or dangerous as it actually is. This devaluation process explains why avoidants often become more disrespectful as relationships deepen rather than less. The better you treat them, the more they may dismiss your efforts because your kindness forces them to confront how much they could lose if things don't work out. They'd rather convince themselves you're not that special than face the terror of being vulnerable with someone who has the power to hurt them. The disrespect manifests in subtle and overt ways. Dismissing your feelings as overreactions, ignoring your boundaries, showing up late or cancelling plans last minute, making unilateral decisions that affect you both, treating you as an option rather than a priority. These behaviors aren't reflections of your worth. They're desperate attempts to maintain emotional distance from someone who has become too important for their comfort. Understanding this dynamic doesn't excuse their behavior or mean you should tolerate disrespect. Rather, it helps you recognize that their treatment of you often has an inverse relationship to your actual value in their life. The more dismissively they treat you, the more they're likely struggling with feelings they don't know how to handle safely. They're not disrespecting you because you're unworthy. They're disrespecting you because you're so worthy of their love that it threatens their entire defensive structure. Testing your tolerance and confirming their core beliefs about love. One of the most painful aspects of avoidant disrespect is that it often serves as unconscious testing of your commitment, patience, and staying power. Avoidants have typically learned that people who claim to love them will eventually leave when things get difficult. So they create difficulties to test whether you'll abandon them like others have done in their past. This testing behavior manifests as treating you progressively worse to see if you'll stick around, pushing your boundaries to discover your breaking point, or creating conflicts to determine whether you'll fight for the relationship or simply give up. They're essentially asking, how badly can I treat you before you prove that you'll leave me too? Without consciously realizing they're conducting this cruel experiment, the disrespect becomes a way of confirming their core belief that they're unlovable and that relationships inevitably end in abandonment. If they can push you away through poor treatment, they can tell themselves that you never really loved them anyway, that they were right to maintain emotional distance, that their defensive strategies are necessary for survival. Your departure becomes evidence that validates their worldview rather than tragedy that challenges it. This testing is particularly heartbreaking because it punishes your love and loyalty. The more you prove your commitment by tolerating their disrespect, the more they may escalate their testing to find your limits. They're unconsciously trying to force you to confirm their belief that love is conditional and that caring about someone inevitably leads to disappointment and rejection. The avoidant doesn't consciously plan this testing. It emerges from their deep-seated fear that if you truly knew them, saw their flaws, and experienced their worst behaviors, you would inevitably choose to leave. By showing you their worst behaviors up front, they're trying to control the timing and circumstances of what they believe to be inevitable abandonment. They'd rather be rejected for their authentic self than abandoned after becoming vulnerable. Power, control, and fear of engulfment driving dismissive behavior. For many avoidants, disrespectful behavior serves as a strategy to maintain power and control in relationships where they fear losing their autonomy and individual identity. They've learned that emotional connection can lead to being controlled, manipulated, or consumed by others' needs, so they preemptively establish dominance through dismissive treatment that keeps you at arm's length. This power dynamic manifests as making decisions without consulting you, dismissing your input on matters that affect you both, treating your emotional needs as inconvenient obstacles to their preferences, or acting as if your feelings and perspectives are less valid than theirs. They're essentially establishing that their comfort, convenience, and desires take precedence over yours, creating a hierarchy where they remain safely above the vulnerability line. The disrespect becomes their way of maintaining emotional distance while still enjoying the benefits of your presence in their life. They can have someone who cares about them, supports them, and enhances their daily experience without having to reciprocate that level of investment or emotional availability. It's a strategy for having companionship without commitment, care without reciprocity, love without vulnerability. This control strategy often intensifies when you express needs, set boundaries, or ask for more emotional availability from them. The avoidant responds to these reasonable requests with increased disrespect because they interpret your needs as threats to their autonomy. They'd rather push you away than risk feeling controlled, obligated, or responsible for meeting your emotional requirements. Their fear of engulfment, the terror that loving someone or being loved will result in loss of their individual identity, drives much of their dismissive behavior. When you show them love, understanding, and acceptance, it triggers their engulfment fears because they don't trust that they can receive your care without eventually being expected to sacrifice their autonomy in return. The disrespect becomes a preemptive strike against the suffocation they fear is coming. Projection of internal shame and learned relationship patterns. Avoidants often disrespect others as a way of projecting their own internal shame, self-criticism, and negative self-perception onto external targets. They carry deep wounds about their own worthiness, lovability, and value, and treating you poorly becomes a way of making you feel the inadequacy they struggle with internally, while temporarily relieving themselves of that emotional burden. When an avoidant makes you feel small, unimportant, or unworthy of basic respect, they're unconsciously transferring their own feelings of inadequacy onto you. They've learned to manage their shame by deflecting it outward rather than facing it directly. Your pain becomes temporary relief from their own internal suffering, though this relief is always short-lived and often followed by additional guilt and self-loathing. This projection often manifests as criticism that reveals more about their self-perception than about your actual behavior. When they call you needy, they're projecting their own terror of neediness. When they call you too sensitive, they're deflecting their own overwhelming sensitivity. When they treat you as if you're too much, they're expressing their own fear of being too much for others to handle. Many avoidants also learn disrespectful relationship patterns in their families of origin and unconsciously recreate these dynamics in their adult relationships. If they grew up in environments where love was inconsistent, where respect was conditional, or where emotional abuse was normalized, they may not even recognize their behavior as problematic or understand that healthier dynamics are possible. These learned patterns often include withholding affection as punishment, using silence as a weapon, criticizing partners for having emotional needs, or treating romantic relationships as less important than other priorities. They learned that this is how intimate relationships function and may genuinely not understand why you're upset about treatment that feels normal to them based on their early experiences. Self-sabotage and the paradox of avoidant disrespect. Perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of avoidant disrespect is when it serves as unconscious self-sabotage designed to destroy relationships before they can cause deeper pain. The avoidant would rather be the one to ruin the relationship through their own behavior than risk being hurt by their partner's eventual departure or disappointment. This self-sabotage often intensifies when relationships reach milestones that suggest increasing commitment or permanence. Moving in together, meeting family members, making future plans, or simply reaching a level of emotional intimacy that feels significant can trigger the avoidant to begin treating you worse as a way of forcing the relationship to end on their terms. The disrespect becomes a weapon they use against their own happiness because they've learned that good things don't last, that people eventually leave, and that the deeper the connection, the more devastating the eventual loss will be. They'd rather destroy something beautiful themselves than wait for it to be destroyed by circumstances beyond their control. The ultimate paradox of avoidant disrespect is that it often reveals the exact opposite of what it appears to communicate. Their dismissive treatment doesn't mean you're unimportant. It means you're so important that they don't know how to handle their feelings safely. their cruelty doesn't indicate lack of care. It indicates care so intense it feels threatening to their psychological equilibrium. When an avoidant treats you poorly, it's often because you've managed to penetrate their defenses in ways that trigger their deepest fears about love, loss, and vulnerability. You've become significant enough to activate their attachment system, which their unconscious mind perceives as dangerous and responds to with defensive cruelty designed to restore emotional distance, breaking the cycle and protecting your well-being. Understanding the psychology behind avoidant disrespect can help you avoid taking their behavior personally, but it shouldn't change your standards for how you deserve to be treated. The most effective response to avoidant disrespect is often not to fight it or try to understand it, but to simply refuse to accept it through clear boundaries and consistent self-respect. This means leaving situations where you're being treated disrespectfully, declining to engage in conversations where you're being dismissed or criticized, setting firm limits about what behavior you will and won't tolerate, and ultimately being willing to end relationships where consistent disrespect is the norm rather than the exception. Your response should prioritize your own emotional health and self-respect rather than trying to heal their attachment wounds or prove your worth through tolerating poor treatment. You can have compassion for their psychological struggles while still maintaining standards for how you deserve to be treated in any relationship. Sometimes maintaining these boundaries and refusing to accept disrespectful treatment can actually help avoidants recognize their patterns and motivate them to seek the help they need to develop healthier relationship skills. But this should never be your primary motivation. Your primary motivation should be protecting your own well-being and maintaining your self-respect. Remember that understanding why someone treats you poorly doesn't obligate you to accept that treatment. You can have empathy for their psychological struggles while still choosing to surround yourself with people who can love you in ways that feel safe, respectful, and nurturing. Your understanding of their psychology is a tool for making informed decisions about what you'll accept, not a reason to sacrifice your emotional well-being or settle for less than you deserve.